A signature hit the paper, and a woman's future changed hands. Nobody spoke. A man folded the deed into his coat pocket and walked out without looking back. She stood there, arms crossed, staring at the door that just closed on her marriage. Money changed hands next. Counted twice. Slid across a wooden table like it was nothing. The woman who just got traded for a piece of dirt didn't cry. She just picked up her one bag and walked toward a truck that wasn't hers anymore. Her name was Sarah. Her husband, Wade, didn't say goodbye. He just wanted the ranch, however deserted it looked on paper. What Sarah found waiting behind that ranch house door would turn out to be worth more than the land, more than the marriage, more than anything Wade thought he was getting. What was it? Stay with me on this one. The truck rattled down a dirt road with 200 miles of nothing on either side. Sarah sat with her bag on her lap, both hands gripping the handle like it was the only thing left that belonged to her. The man driving wasn't Wade. He was older, quiet, hired just to get her from one place to the next. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. 3 days earlier, none of this existed. Wade had a small spread outside of town, cattle he couldn't afford to feed, and a banknote that kept him up at night. Sarah had married him 7 years back when he still smiled at her over breakfast, back when the ranch felt like something they were building instead of something crushing them. The drought came first. Then the cattle prices dropped. Then Wade started disappearing into town for hours at a time, coming home smelling like whiskey and cigarettes, saying less and less until he stopped saying anything at all. She'd known something was wrong for months. She just never figured he'd solve it by selling her. The offer came from a man named Elias Boone, a rancher 2 counties over who'd buried 2 wives already and wanted a third without the trouble of courting one. Boone had land. Boone had money. What Boone didn't have was patience, and what he wanted, he was willing to pay for. Wade had a deed to a ranch that belonged to his late uncle, a piece of land nobody had touched in 6 years, sitting empty out past the ridge where the maps stopped making sense. Boone wanted a wife. Wade wanted that ranch gone from his name and some cash in his pocket to cover what he owed. They shook on it like men trading horses. Sarah found out the morning the papers were signed. Wade didn't ask her. He told her. "It's done," he'd said, not looking up from his coffee. "You're going to Boone's place. He'll treat you fine as long as you don't give him trouble." She'd stood there in the kitchen they'd shared for 7 years, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and say it was some kind of joke gone too far. It never came. Wade signed the deed transferring his uncle's ranch to Boone that same afternoon, and Boone signed the papers making Sarah his. 2 signatures. 2 transactions. 1 truck ride into nowhere. Now here she was, watching the land change outside the window, dry and cracked and endless, wondering what kind of man buys a wife like he's buying cattle. The driver finally spoke somewhere past the second hour. "Ranch is another 20 miles out. Boone's not there himself. Sent me to get you settled first. Says he'll come by end of week." Sarah didn't answer. She just watched the fence posts go by, counting them because it was easier than thinking about what was waiting on the other end of this road. She thought about her mother, long past, who used to say a woman's worth wasn't measured by what a man paid for her. She thought about the ring on her finger, the one Wade gave her the day they married, still there because nobody had bothered to ask for it back. She thought about the 7 years she'd spent scraping by next to a man who apparently saw her as collateral the whole time. What she didn't think about, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that Wade hadn't gotten the better end of this deal. Not even close. The ranch he'd just sold to cover his debts, that deserted piece of land out past the ridge, wasn't as empty as it looked on paper. Wade never bothered checking. Never bothered walking the property past the front gate. He'd inherited it from an uncle he barely knew, saw the crumbling house and the untouched fields, and figured it was worthless. A liability. Something to unload fast for cash and be done with. He was wrong, and he wouldn't find out how wrong for weeks, by which time it would be too late to undo any of it. The truck hit a rut, and Sarah's bag slid off her lap. She caught it before it hit the floor, and for a moment her hand rested flat against the worn leather, the only possession she still had that was fully hers. Everything else, her name, her marriage, her future, had just been negotiated away by 2 men in a room she wasn't even invited into. The driver slowed the truck as a house came into view in the distance, sitting alone against a gray sky. "That's Boone's place," he said. "Home now, I suppose." Sarah didn't answer. She just stared ahead, bracing for whatever was coming next. The truck pulled up to the house, and the driver killed the engine. Sarah didn't move right away. She just looked at the place through the windshield. 2 stories, paint peeling, one shutter hanging by a single nail. Nothing like the ranch she'd left. That one had been small but alive. This one looked like it was holding its breath. Boone said someone would come by tomorrow to bring supplies, the driver said. Stoves in the kitchen, wood's out back. You'll manage. He didn't offer to carry her bag in. She didn't ask him to. She stepped down from the truck, boots hitting dry dirt, and watched him turn the truck around without another word. No wave. No goodbye. Just dust kicking up behind the tires as he drove back the way they came, leaving her standing alone in front of a house that belonged to a man she'd never met. She stood there for a long moment. The wind picked up dust around her ankles. Somewhere far off a hawk called out, circling. Sarah walked up the porch steps. Third one creaked so bad she thought it might give out under her. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Dust everywhere. Furniture covered in sheets. A grandfather clock in the corner stopped, hands frozen at some hour that didn't matter anymore. The air smelled old, like a place that had been closed up and forgotten. She walked through the front room, running her hand along the back of a covered chair, leaving a clean streak in the dust. This was supposed to be Boone's ranch now, on paper anyway, even though he had no plans to live in it himself. He'd told the driver as much. He had his own spread 2 counties over. This place was just something he picked up cheap off a desperate man, and if Sarah ended up here for now, that was fine by him. One less thing to worry about. She moved through the house room by room. Kitchen first, empty cabinets, a sink with a dry pump handle. Then a hallway. Then a room that must have belonged to Wade's uncle once. Bed still made, like he'd stepped out and never came back. At the end of the hallway, a door was closed. Sarah reached for the handle. It was locked. She frowned, tried again. Solid. Not just stuck, actually locked, and there was no key on the ring the driver had handed her. She stepped back and looked at the door for a moment. Strange, a door locked inside an empty house nobody had touched in 6 years. Everything else stood wide open, gathering dust, but this one room somebody had sealed up on purpose. She let it go. Not her house. Not her business. She had enough to worry about without prying into locked doors in a dead man's ranch. She spent the rest of the afternoon making the front room livable, pulled the sheets off furniture, folded them into a pile, swept what she could with a broom she found leaning in a closet, found a jar of matches in the kitchen and got the wood stove going once the sun started dropping, because the temperature out here fell fast once the light went. She sat on a wooden chair near the stove that evening, her bag still packed beside her, like some part of her expected to have to run again at any moment. That's when she heard it. A sound from down the hallway. Faint. Coming from behind that locked door. Sarah went still, chair creaking under her as she turned her head. She waited, holding her breath, telling herself it was the house settling, wood contracting in the cold, maybe an animal that got in through a broken window somewhere. Then it came again, louder this time. A dragging sound. Something moving against the floor. She stood up slow, heart going harder now, and walked toward the hallway. Every step on that old floor sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. She reached the locked door and put her ear against it. Breathing. Somebody, or something, was breathing on the other side of that door. Hello. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted it to. No answer. Just the breathing, ragged, slow. She stepped back from the door, mind racing through everything Wade never told her, everything Boone never mentioned. A locked room. Something alive inside it. Nobody warned her about this. Nobody warned her about any of it. Come to think of it, not really. She found an old iron poker by the stove and came back to the door with it gripped tight in both hands. She wasn't sure what she planned to do with it exactly. It was just something to hold on to besides fear. I'm coming in, she said, loud enough for whoever, whatever, was behind that door to hear her. Don't you do anything stupid. She threw her shoulder against the door once. It held. Twice. And the old frame gave with a crack, with splintering around the lock, and the door swung open into darkness. Sarah stood in the doorway, poker raised, waiting for whatever was going to come at her out of that dark room. Nothing did. She found the matches still in her pocket and struck one, holding it up. The room came into weak, flickering light. A single bed against the far wall, and in it, a shape under a thin blanket, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of shallow breath. A person, alive, But barely. Sarah lowered the poker. Whatever this was, it wasn't a threat. It was just somebody, forgotten in a locked room, on a ranch everybody thought was empty. She lit a second match with a steadier hand now, stepped further inside, and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Whatever this was, it could wait until morning light to sort out properly. For tonight, she'd get a lamp lit, get some water, and figure out in the daylight exactly what Wade had sold along with that ranch. The shape under the blanket moved. A hand shot out and grabbed Sarah's wrist, cold fingers locking tight before she could pull back. Sarah dropped the match. It went dark for half a second before she got another one lit, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her throat. The hand didn't let go. It just held on, shaking, and a voice came out of the dark, cracked and dry like it hadn't been used in weeks. "Don't tell him." Sarah froze. Tell who? Tell who what? The person in the bed pulled herself up slow, wincing with the effort, and the light from the match caught her face for the first time. A woman, older than Sarah, maybe 40, maybe younger, and just worn down past her years. Her skin was pale in a way that didn't come from staying indoors. It came from starving. Her hair was matted flat against her head, and her eyes, once they adjusted to the light, locked onto Sarah's like she couldn't believe what she was looking at. "You're new," the woman said. "He got a new one already." "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "Clara." The woman swallowed hard, like even that word cost her something. "I was Boone's wife. Before you." Sarah went still. Everything about that sentence was wrong. The driver had said Boone buried 2 wives already. He hadn't said one of them was locked in a room on a ranch 2 counties away, alive, breathing, starving in the dark. "They told me you were dead," Sarah said. Clara let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's what he tells everybody. Easier than the truth." Sarah's mind went fast in every direction at once. This wasn't about a locked door anymore. This wasn't about a strange sound in an empty house. A man had told the world his wife was dead and buried, and instead she was rotting in a room nobody was supposed to open. That meant Boone hadn't bought a ranch and a wife in one afternoon. He'd built something else entirely, something that had been running a long time before Sarah ever signed a name to anything. "Why are you locked in here?" Sarah asked, even though some part of her already understood. "Because I know things he can't afford anyone knowing," Clara said. "And because I stopped being useful to him the day I couldn't have children. He doesn't get rid of a wife clean. He just makes sure nobody comes looking." Sarah's hand tightened around the poker she still hadn't set down. Wade sold her off like a piece of stock, and that was ugly enough on its own. But this was something past ugly. This was a man who kept women the way some men kept guns in a drawer, useful until they weren't, and then locked away where nobody would ever think to check. "He's coming end of the week," Sarah said, half to Clara, half to herself. The driver said so. Clara's grip on her wrist got tighter. "Then you've got until end of the week to get out of here, or you end up exactly like me. Maybe worse. If you're still with me, this is exactly the kind of moment worth sticking around for. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because it only gets heavier from here." Sarah pulled a chair over next to the bed and sat down, the poker resting across her knees. "Tell me everything. All of it. I need to know what I walked into." Clara talked slow, stopping every few sentences to catch her breath, and what came out painted a picture of a man far worse than a rancher looking for a third wife without the trouble of courting one. Boone had married Clara 9 years back, a real wedding, a real church, and for 2 years things looked normal enough from the outside. Then Clara lost a baby, and something in Boone changed after that, cold and sudden, like a door closing. He told the town she'd taken sick and passed the following winter. There was even a grave out past the ridge with her name carved into a stone, empty, because Clara had spent every one of those winters right here, in this room, behind this door, fed just enough to keep breathing, and kept quiet by threats Sarah didn't need spelled out to understand. There had been another wife before Clara too, a woman named Ruth, according to what Clara had pieced together from things Boone let slip over the years. Ruth's grave sat right next to the empty one. Except Clara wasn't sure Ruth's was empty. She never got the chance to find out. Boone didn't like questions. "How many rooms like this one does he have?" Sarah asked, already dreading the answer. "Just this one that I know of," Clara said. "But I've been locked up 9 years. Things change." Sarah sat with that for a long moment, the wood stove ticking somewhere down the hallway, the wind pushing against the windows outside. 2 days ago, her biggest problem was a husband who'd stopped looking her in the eye. Now she was sitting in a dead man's house, next to a woman the world thought was buried, both of them waiting on a man who collected wives like cattle and disposed of them just as easy when they stopped serving a purpose. This wasn't about pride anymore, or a bad marriage, or a husband who traded her away for a piece of dirt. This was about staying alive long enough to see another week. Clara reached over and grabbed Sarah's hand again, weaker this time. You have to get us both out. Before he gets here. Because once that door opens with him standing on the other side of it, neither one of us walks away. Outside, far off toward the ridge, a dog started barking at nothing, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the week Boone gave them to settle in had just gotten a whole lot shorter. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat by Clara's bed with the poker across her knees, listening to every creak in that old house like it might be footsteps coming up the porch. By the time gray light came through the window, she'd already made up her mind. We're not waiting for end of week, she said. Clara tried to sit up straighter, wincing. You don't know this land. I don't have the strength to walk it. And even if we made it to the road, where do we go? Who do we tell? Everybody thinks I'm already 6 years in the ground. Then we make somebody listen, Sarah said. But first we get you fed, get you strong enough to stand, and we figure out how far that ridge really is. She spent the morning boiling water, finding what little was left in the pantry, feeding Clara spoonfuls of broth like she was nursing something back from the edge of a cliff. Clara's hands shook less by afternoon. She managed to stand for almost a full minute before her legs gave out, and Sarah caught her. That's when they heard the truck. Not the driver's truck. Bigger, louder, coming up the road faster than anybody being cautious would drive. Sarah went to the window and looked out through a gap in the curtain. A man was climbing down from the cab, broad through the shoulders, hat pulled low, moving toward the house like he already owned everything inside it. Which, on paper, he did. That's him, Clara whispered. That's Boone. He's early, Sarah said. He does that. Keeps people guessing. Clara grabbed Sarah's arm. Listen to me. Whatever happens, don't let him know I'm awake. Don't let him know you found this room. If he thinks you're just some scared new wife who hasn't looked past the front room yet, you might still have a chance. Sarah looked at the busted door, which splintered around the frame where she'd broken it open the night before. There was no hiding that. Too late for that, she said. She had maybe 10 seconds before he'd be through the front door, and in those 10 seconds she made a choice that would decide whether both of them walked out of this house, or neither one did. She grabbed the poker, told Clara to stay down, and shut the bedroom door as best it would shut, propping a chair under the handle. Then she walked to the front room to meet him before he came looking. Boone stepped through the front door like a man inspecting property, which in a way, he was. He was older than she expected, gray through the beard, thick through the middle, with eyes that moved over her the same way they'd probably moved over cattle at auction. He didn't smile. He just looked. You settled in fine, I see, he said. Fine enough. His eyes drifted past her, down the hallway, toward the broken door barely visible in the dim light. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What happened back there? Boone asked, voice flat. Nothing. Old door was stuck. I forced it looking for extra blankets. He walked past her before she could stop him, boots heavy on the floorboards, and Sarah followed with the poker still in her hand, heart slamming so hard she thought he'd hear it. He reached the doorway and looked into the room, and for one long second nobody said anything at all. Then he saw Clara. You're supposed to be quiet, Boone said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and low that made Sarah's skin crawl. You're supposed to stay down. She's alive, Sarah said. She's been alive this whole time. You told everybody she was dead. Boone turned toward her slow, and whatever mask he'd been wearing at the front door was gone now. You had no business opening this door. You had no business locking a woman up for 9 years. He came at her fast for a man his size, hand reaching for the poker, and Sarah swung before she thought better of it, catching him hard across the forearm. He grunted, stumbled back a step, and grabbed for her again. She swung a second time, aiming higher this time, and the iron connected with the side of his head with a crack that echoed down the hallway. Boone went down against the doorframe, one hand pressed to his temple, blood already coming through his fingers. He didn't get back up right away. Sarah stood over him, chest heaving, poker still raised, waiting to see if he'd try again. He didn't. He just lay there, breathing hard, glaring up at her like he still couldn't believe a woman he'd bought, and paid for was the one standing, and he was the one on the floor. Ruth, Clara said from the bed, voice shaking but clear. Ask him about Ruth. Ask him what's really under that headstone. Boone said nothing. His silence answered the question well enough. Sarah reached down, careful, and pulled a length of rope off a nearby chair where it had been left holding a curtain back. She tied his hands while he was still too dazed to fight her properly, tighter than she probably needed to. And when she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at the man who'd built a house out of buried lies and locked doors. You're going to answer for all of it, she said, starting with her, and whoever's really in that other grave. Boone finally looked up at her, blood drying on the side of his face. And for the first time since he'd walked through that door, he looked like a man who understood exactly how much trouble he was in. Boone sat tied to a porch post through the rest of that morning, and Sarah didn't waste a minute of it. She found a rifle in a closet, an old one Wade's uncle must have left behind, and she kept it close while she and Clara worked out what came next. The sheriff was 2 counties over, same as Boone's spread, which meant the man in charge of law out here had likely shaken Boone's hand 100 times at cattle auctions and church socials. Clara didn't trust him. Said Boone bought drinks for that sheriff every fall. Said everybody in that county owed Boone something one way or another. So they didn't wait for the law to come find them. Sarah hitched the wagon she found in the barn, got Clara settled on a bed of blankets in the back, and drove 3 hours to the next county over, where nobody owed Boone a thing. The deputy there listened to the whole story without saying a word. Then he rode out himself with 2 other men, and what they found behind that ranch house changed everything. Not just the locked room. The second grave, too, the one Clara said might not be empty. They dug it up on a cold gray afternoon 3 days later, and Ruth Boone had been under that headstone the whole time. Exactly 6 years, exactly like the town believed. Except she hadn't died of any sickness. The doctor they brought in from the county seat said as much within an hour of looking at what was left. Boone never said a word through any of it. Not when they arrested him. Not when they walked him past the crowd that gathered outside the courthouse 3 weeks later. People who used to tip their hats to him at church, now just staring like they were looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. He went to trial that spring. Clara testified. Sarah testified. The doctor testified. It didn't take the jury long. Sarah never went back to that ranch after the day she drove Clara out of there. She heard later the county took it over, since there wasn't anybody left with a clean claim to it. Wade's uncle's name was still on some old paper somewhere. But Wade himself, once word got around about what he'd sold Sarah into without ever checking what he was selling, found himself with a lot fewer friends in town than he used to have. He came looking for her once. Showed up at the boarding house where she was staying, hat in his hands, asking if they could talk. Sarah stood on the porch and let him say his piece. He said he didn't know. Said he never would have done it if he'd known what Boone was. Said he was sorry, over and over, until the word stopped meaning anything at all. You didn't ask, Sarah said. That's the part you keep missing. You didn't ask what you were selling me into. You just wanted the money and the ranch gone. Whatever waited on the other side of that deal, you didn't care, so long as it wasn't your problem anymore. He didn't have an answer for that. She didn't wait around for one. She went back inside and let the door close between them, same as he'd let a door close on her that morning in the kitchen, when he told her instead of asked her, and never once looked up from his coffee. Clara stayed with Sarah those first few months, the 2 of them renting a small place together while Clara got her strength back proper. It took time. 9 years locked in a room does something to a person that doesn't heal in a season. But she started eating full meals again, sleeping without waking up every hour expecting a locked door and a man's voice on the other side of it. She started laughing sometimes too, quiet at first, like she was testing whether she still remembered how. Sarah found work at a general store in town, counting money that was hers to count, earning wages that were hers to keep. Small thing, ordinary thing. But after everything, ordinary felt like something worth holding on to. People in town asked her about it sometimes, the whole story, how she ended up the one who broke a man like Boone down to nothing. She never had much of an answer beyond the truth of it. She said she just opened a door that was supposed to stay locked. Said the rest followed after that, one decision at a time, none of it planned, all of it necessary. What Wade never understood, what he probably still doesn't understand, is that he thought he was getting rid of a problem when he signed that deed and sent her off with a stranger. He thought a deserted ranch and some cash in his pocket was the better end of that trade. He never once considered what might be waiting behind a locked door on land. He never bothered to walk. Sarah did. Sarah found it. And what she found there wasn't just Clara, breathing and starving in the dark. It was proof that a man's worth doesn't come from what he can trade away, and a woman's worth was never his to sell in the first place. Wade lost more than a ranch that day. He just didn't know it yet, sitting there over his coffee, not looking up, thinking he'd solved a problem when really, he'd just let one walk out his front door and become something he could never touch again.